Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking a look at what is stopping resource efficiency in the food and beverage sector and exploring some of the findings from the recent Next Manufacturing Revolution report. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the supply chain and waste working groups here at 2 Degrees, and I'm delighted to welcome our presenter today, Dr. Greg Lavery, CEO of Lavery Pennell and lead author of the Next Manufacturing Revolution study. Today's presentation will last around 20 minutes, which will leave us with 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. As part of today's webinar, we're very keen to hear your views on what is stopping resource efficiency in the food and beverage sector. And we have set up a discussion forum in the supply chain working group on 2 Degrees, which you can access using the URL on the screen in front of you, or simply go to the supply chain working group and scroll down. I'd encourage you to add to this during or after the webinar, and your views will be included at a workshop hosted by the University of Cambridge's Institute for Manufacturing with industry leaders, government and NGOs later this month. So it really is a great opportunity to get your voice heard. Before we begin with today's presentation, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions for Greg throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Just type in your question and press send, and we'll wait until the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the presentation, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Greg, who will get us started with today's presentation. So over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a really interesting opportunity for us to talk about the opportunities and the barriers. As Stephen said, this is about just sharing some of the insights, just how big this opportunity is around non-labour resource efficiency in the food and beverage sector, and then having a discussion about what those barriers are. And as Stephen has mentioned, in parallel, there's a forum to discuss this online. So hopefully you can toggle between this and that and capture ideas around barriers, and hopefully some of the thoughts that we'll have around some of the opportunities will spark ideas where you say, yeah, we tried that a couple of years ago, but it didn't work because X. Please put X into the online discussion. That'd be really useful. And of course, any questions through the usual channels on this discussion box. So moving on in the presentation then, just trying to click through. Let's go to the next one. All right, so a quick introduction as to who we are and how this report came about. We're strategy advisors at Lavery Pennell. We work in the field of profitable sustainability, so moving sustainability beyond resource, beyond compliance, beyond box ticking and beyond risk management into how do you actually turn sustainability into a profit centre for your organisation. And we come from a corporate strategy, engineering, subject matter background. The genesis for this discussion was we work with, apart from all the projects we've done, we work with the University of Cambridge Institute for Manufacturing and 2 Degrees on a report called the Next Manufacturing Revolution, which looked at 7 non-labour resource efficiency opportunities across all subsectors in the UK economy, including food and beverage. And we'll be drawing from those outcomes to discuss what, in coming slides, the sort of size of the opportunity and where that exists for the food and beverage sector. So, without further ado, then, what are the opportunities for the food and beverage manufacturing sector? Well, there's 4 key non-labour resource efficiency opportunities, and we use the term non-labour resource efficiency because sometimes, if you just say resource efficiency, people think that's about productivity and labour productivity. Which of course it isn't, because what we're talking about here in the food and beverage sector is energy efficiency, production waste, transport efficiency, and packaging optimization. And the benefits to be gained from just those 4 areas, we calculated to be, with the University of Cambridge at 2 Degrees, to be about 920 million per annum in profit increases through cost savings, and 6.6 million tonnes of CO2 per annum in greenhouse gas emission reduction. And of course, there are additional benefits from improved national food security. If we're wasting less food or saving energy efficiency, then there's energy security as well as food security. reducing the need for landfills and less traffic congestion. So what I'd like to now do is work through very quickly each of those 4 areas, just to show you the size of the prize here under each of those. Okay, so first of all, energy efficiency. To give you an idea, the food and beverage manufacturing sector spends $1.26 billion per annum, which is roughly 1.4% of the food and beverage manufacturing sector's revenue, and that represents 13% of the UK's total manufacturing energy use. And what we've got here on this diagram is a graph that I'll talk you through, which is how we look at what good practice is. So first point to note about this graph is that it's about energy intensity, which is the amount of energy per unit of output produced by a food manufacturer. The x-axis along the bottom is how many years a company has been going since it decided to improve its energy intensity or resource intensity, because you'll see this graph again. And the y-axis is the average or the compound average annual improvement that they achieved. And then what that means, that if you can say, well, you, like Unilever, if you've been working at about 4% per annum improvement for about 15 or 16 years, you come in about a 50% overall improvement. And that's what the orange, yellow and green lines are. They're sort of isoclines that show you sort of overall improvement. And what we can see from this graph is that there are some really good performers. Adnams, for instance, in a very short period of 1 year, achieved a 10% improvement in energy intensity. And there's some guys like Unilever that have been working at this for over 15 years at about 4% improvement, leading to roughly that sort of 50% overall improvement, and Danone and Nestle not far behind, albeit at a faster rate over a shorter period. So this sort of shows us what's going on. And if we're to overlay on this some interesting statistics, so I'll just do that. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, so good. If we look then at where good practice is, we see good practice at around Nestle and Danone over 5% per annum, and we see the subsector average improvement through the statistics from the Office for National Statistics at around 2% per annum. And so what you get there is a gap between those two, which, if you quantify the size of that, is worth for the food and beverage manufacturing sector $350 million per annum in cost savings. So takeaways from this: have a look at how you're doing with your company. If you're close to 2%, then, well, you're pretty much on average for the sector. If you're 5% or above, you're good practice. And if you're anywhere in between, there's plenty of opportunity there. Unfortunately, there are actually companies who are in the negatives here. And if that's you, you're going backwards, and there's a massive opportunity to improve your energy efficiency. So big opportunities in energy efficiency. Moving on then to the next topic, which is production waste. A similar sort of graph, don't need to explain that again. You're all experts in reading these graphs now. Again, this is production waste intensity improvement. Overarching statistics are food, beverage and tobacco manufacturing sector subsectors all added together. Now, the Office for National Statistics don't split out tobacco, so we've gone with the total there, bearing in mind tobacco is quite small in the UK in terms of manufacturing. Overall manufacturing waste in 2008 was 7 million tonnes. Which represents a third of the UK manufacturing's total production waste. So there's a really significant statistic about how much the food and beverage industry is creating in terms of waste in the UK. And we can see here some even better performances. So Unilever, for example, overall 82% improvement since it started its journey some 15 or so years ago. That's an amazing statistic. So if you're sitting on sort of 10-15% improvement, there's plenty of opportunity out there. And we can learn from, and I'll take you through some of the lessons from some of those better players. And if we overlay again on top of that, where we're seeing good practice is sort of over about 6.7% per annum improvement, and as well overlay on that what the subsector average improvement is, which is about 2.1% per annum from 2004 to 2008. The difference again is worth a significant, in this case, 400 million per annum in cost savings. We can repeat that again, that sort of analysis, as we did for the next manufacturing revolution for transport efficiency. Overall statistics, UK logistics, serving all sectors of the economy, not just food and beverage, is roughly 30 billion per annum. And sadly, there's not been much efficiency improvement in transport over the next 10 years. You can see there good practice. Toyota's been going for a long time. It's just under 50% improvement, but they've been going for 20 years. Komatsu and United Biscuits are a little bit behind them over a shorter time frame. And again, if we overlay then what's good practice, anything over 6.5% looks like good practice, and as well industry average, which sadly is about 0. The difference then between those offers about 170 million per annum cost savings for food and beverage manufacturers. The fourth area then is packaging. Slightly different approach to this one in terms of illustrating the opportunity. What we see then, and this is a graph straight from statistics right out of RAP's benchmarking database on packaging. And the way to read this is 100% is the average for a stock keeping unit in terms of weight of packaging. So that might be cornflakes in the cereal category there. And the red dot at the top of the line is the highest packaging user around that. So, for instance, if we look at one of those cereals, the largest cereal variance there has a difference of about 180% at the top, which means they're using 80% more packaging than average. And at the other end of that spectrum is the lowest. So there is a box of cornflakes out there that's using about 20% of the average packaging. So there's an enormous variation here. And what we find is that sometimes manufacturers say to us, oh, yes, we're doing everything we can on packaging. Well, that would appear from this data to be blatantly not the case, and that there's still plenty of opportunity. Obviously, this is driven by a bunch of different factors, including marketing, wanting to have a premium experience, and we've all bought muesli that comes within a packet, within a box, within a fancy labelling system, compared with muesli that just comes out of a straight plastic bag. And there are a bunch of reasons there for why that packaging varies, but on the other hand, if you're trying to minimise your packaging, or rather optimise your packaging, it would appear there's a lot to be done across many sectors, or many SKUs there within the food and beverage sector. And in fact, if we look on the next graph here at who's done well on this, there are some really good case studies here of companies that have significantly reduced their, in fact, let's call it lightweighted, their packaging, ranging from 500 milliliter PET bottles, which is where Nestle in their water division, Pepsi and Coca-Cola compete. Adnams within 1 year reduced their bottles for beer by 33%. And there are various other examples there of really good practice in packaging reduction. So there is a lot of opportunity within packaging. Now, we haven't included in the overall opportunity for cost saving a packaging saving, because this is a very difficult thing to rationalise amongst the marketing, the distribution, the suppliers and the whole value chain. So this is something that can be gained on top of that 920 million overall opportunity. We didn't want to be too controversial or unconservative in our numbers. So we left it there. To share with you some of the ways that companies have significantly improved their resource efficiency, what we've got on this next slide is 4 types of opportunity that we've consistently found in both the projects that we've worked on and our Next Manufacturing Revolution research in terms of how you can improve your resource efficiency. And all of these apply to packaging, energy, waste and transport. The first level of these is incremental, where you've got opportunity typically of 5 to 10% improvement through things like behaviour change and cultural change, such as monitoring, identifying and rectifying poor behaviour, educating staff, those sorts of things. We all refer to those, as you know, as quick wins. They're fast, they're easy and they're low capex. The second level is around processes and systems, where we find typical benefits of 10 to 20%. These involve changes, as the title says, in processes and systems, so they're fairly low capex but can take a little while longer. The third level is then structural change, which offers some larger savings, but requires new equipment and therefore requires capital expenditure and can be more challenging when companies are tight for cash. And let's remember, this structural change is what most engineers like most, because everyone likes new shiny equipment. That's not to denigrate engineers, I'm one myself. But that tends to be where engineers say, look, that's the easy thing for us to do. And certainly in terms of personnel and staff, that's the easy thing, because behaviour change is a lot more complex. However, the capital required is a lot higher. And then the final level is core redesign, where you say, let's change what we do as a business. redesigning our products or our business model to take substance out of those, leading to potentially bigger savings. So, for instance, there are various models in other sectors and the food and beverage industry where you say, okay, we're not going to, for instance, we're going to recycle beer barrels and therefore recapture that packaging compared with, for instance, a single-use disposable bottle which then goes into recycling, which might be a lot more resource intensive in terms of returning those bottles. Of course, core redesign can be difficult and slow because it can challenge some of the other aims of the company. Okay, so that's a discussion of the opportunity. Hopefully that sparked some thoughts that you've then been able to go to the discussion forum site and include there. Wanted to also share the types of barriers that we found in the next manufacturing revolution. This is just an overview of the 8 major headings. There will be lots of subpoints under these and even potential other headings, hence the need for a discussion with the 2 Degrees community, including yourselves, to start to really peel the onion and get to what's really behind all of these barriers. Let me introduce the 8 that we found. Senior executive leadership throughout the literature and through practical discussion with numerous manufacturers and, of course, in our work as well. What we find is that it's necessary to have that sort of leadership to drive change across the organisation, commit the resources necessary, invest cash and manage trade-offs. So it's very difficult for the sustainability team to have a fight with the marketing team about the type of packaging that's used. There are trade-offs involved in that, and it requires senior executives to start to involve themselves in some of those difficult trade-offs. It's all about leadership. A whole bunch of different information challenges related to improvements, ranging from how we're doing now, we don't even know that, so how can we figure out how well we're doing? Most companies have a clear grasp of that. But things like understanding what we're trying to achieve, what are the best practices, we're all very busy. Is that sort of information readily available for the right decision makers? Do we understand customers' true delivery requirements so that we can improve our transport efficiency, those sorts of points? Of course, resources are needed in terms of both cash and people to drive some of these projects. A key point then, number 4, was around skill mix. Many companies have all the engineering, commercial, change management systems capabilities in their organisations, but don't often pull those together around resource challenges. There are a number of design concerns as well, designing for recycling, for remanufacturing and reuse. Packaging design is a very challenging design issue as well. We're aware of other legal issues such as backloading of post-use food and beverage containers is not allowed on fresh food trucks, although we note that the cooperative has got around that through some innovative enclosure devices and systems. Concerns around anti-competitive behaviour also can stop some innovation around resource efficiency barriers. The second last one is infrastructure. We see issues around waste collection and cross-modal freight transfer as examples of that. And then finally, collaboration, which says that if you're going to reduce your energy, packaging waste and transport, a conversation with suppliers and customers is often very necessary to say, well, what do you need in terms of these things? How can we help you? And how can we work together to reduce our combined footprint? So we'd love to hear your further thoughts on those in the forum and subsequently in the questions and discussion. So let me move to then the barriers that you're seeing. So we'd love to hear those. And what we have arranged is a food and beverage barriers workshop on the 23rd of January. We have a guest list including some senior government civil servants. We've got industry associations, NGOs, subject matter experts and companies in a really small roundtable conversation. The outcomes of that conversation will be manufacturers identifying and addressing opportunities and barriers, government departments integrating the findings into policy. The University of Cambridge's Institute for Manufacturing is keen to reshape its research agenda around some of these barriers. And of course, we'll be disseminating out to the next manufacturing revolution community and 2 Degrees the findings from that. So this discussion that we're just about to have now and the online discussion is your chance to really contribute your thoughts and make a difference around the frustrations that you're feeling every day about non-labour resource efficiency within your organisations. and those that you might see at clients if you're consultants as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about each of those. The discussion on the first slide, there was a bit.ly site, which I'll remind you of, so I took that down. So it's the usual bit.ly prefix followed by 1, little j, 5, little m, capital L, little h, and then 3. That's where that conversation will be going on for the next week before that 23rd workshop, where we'll take those ideas together and take them to that expert workshop on the 23rd. You can read more information about the Next Manufacturing Revolution report at those sites there that are listed. So I think that brings us to the end of my part. Stephen, how are the questions coming along, and how would you like to take this discussion forward?
Great, thank you very much, Greg. So yeah, we've got questions coming in, and I'll bring up the URL for people who want to contribute to the discussion on the 2 Degrees platform. But we've also got questions coming in from the audience now. Maybe a good one just to start on, Greg. Someone's just asking for some clarification around the packaging figures which you mentioned. Are they the same materials for each packaging range that you compared?
So that graph that I showed you on slide 6 was about weight. So no, they're not the same materials. This recognises that different stock keeping units use different packaging types and materials. So the answer to that question is no, it's not the same. It's all about weight. And the reason why weight is quite useful is because that leads to transport energy use and as well, I mean, it's important for customers, because if customers have to carry very heavy packaging around, that's a problem for them. So yes, the analysis could drive into that packaging materials, and in fact, when designing packaging materials are very important, of course, to make sure that they're recyclable and they're pretty environmentally benign, ideally using recyclable bio-based materials in those, as Coke and various others have done with their PET, using that plant-based PET. Great,
thanks, Greg. Another question here is, to what extent does government policy incentivise these opportunities? So are they taking a sort of carrot and stick approach to this?
Yeah, that's a really very pertinent question, because what we always find is that if the government adopts such an aggressive sort of stick or forcing mechanism, that can cause outright pushback and all sorts of problems. Now, we've seen that in many countries with carbon taxes and trading scheme. In Australia, for instance, that was recently rejected and led to a change of government because industry just didn't want to engage on that topic. We recommend that actually carrots are a whole lot better, and that in this case of resource efficiency, there's already a really good economic case to do it. So we'll be encouraging the government on the 23rd to ask questions around what they can do to enable rather than to get in the way. And there's been some really interesting policy around the world. In Victoria and Australia, actually the state government there forced every manufacturer or large energy user to do an audit every couple of years, and any energy efficiency opportunities that were found with a payback period of 3 years or better were mandatory. So actually that led to an enormous improvement in energy efficiency, and the company said, this is fantastic. We found all sorts of opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise have found. We didn't have to pay tax. We weren't competitively disadvantaged. In fact, we're now competitively better off because we have a lower cost base. And so there's some interesting opportunities there to do some really interesting policy. There are some other areas of policy that can be very important, such as supporting infrastructure, and in fact, product standards can actually be very important as well. So let's not sell incandescent light bulbs anymore, and as you would all know, there are phase-out programs going on in most countries around the world to move to compact fluorescent and LED solutions for lighting, for lamps especially. So that's actually a way that government can do that as well. On the other hand, there's some very nice incentive schemes that can be done as well, and we've seen that, for instance, in the use of renewable heat, which is a good way to reduce your energy use as well, through the renewable heat incentive scheme in the UK as well. So all sorts of opportunities there. So a very good question. Thank you, whoever asked that.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Another question we've got here. If you were struggling getting your company to address resource efficiency, what would be your game plan to get senior leadership on board? What would your first step be?
Yeah, a second excellent question there. What we always advise companies is let's make it about business. So it's very easy to say, oh, it's good for the trees and it's good for the animals and it's good for our future generations. But at the end of the day, a skeptical senior leadership wants to see hard numbers. So what we always advise is put your business hat on, get some help from the treasury team or the financial team, and build a mini business case that gets you the resources to build a proper business case. And we've done this with a number of clients. We've said, look, we'll help you with a little bit of thinking to point you in the right direction. We've helped those companies with statistics from the next manufacturing revolution and arm them with the ability to say, look, we think there's an opportunity of 100 million a year in cost savings or whatever the relevant scale figure is. For some of our clients, it's quite large. That opportunity there can be unlocked at typically a payback period of 2.5 or in one of our clients' cases, less than 2 years, which creates a very good IRR, NPV, ROI, all of those three-letter acronyms that the finance department like to hear. And that means you're talking the language of finance. So no longer is to move the sustainability department from that sort of compliance role into this profit centre is all about talking that language and saying, we think there's a massive resource efficiency opportunity here. Let's get some resources behind this to drive after that. So an excellent question.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Another question here. The food sector has a particularly high number of very small companies with 20 or less employees. Can the principles which you've been talking about be applied to these businesses as well, or are we only looking at the large-scale entities?
Yeah, good question. The answer is yes, they can be applied right down. And in fact, there's some very good case studies of very small bread bakeries who've made enormous savings through thinking hard about how to use their resources and the types of equipment that they buy. There are some very simple things that can be done with very, very fast payback, such as making sure that the lights don't go on at 4 a.m. when the first bakers come in. Actually, the lights that are needed for the baking should go on, but you don't turn the whole plant on at very early in the morning. That's something you do when the first workers come in. And similarly, you don't let the cleaners turn all the lights off in the middle of the night once they've cleaned. You can actually save a significant proportion of energy by doing that. So some smart thinking, and these are the 4 levels we come back to. So that's your behavioural level. Processes and systems say, let's think about how we turn stuff on. The equipment or the structural level, the 3rd level, there are some simple things you can do around getting the lighting transitioned into LED and compact fluorescent, which can pay for itself within a very short period, which makes that economic to do. And then the core redesign says, okay, how we operate what we're offering to our customers, is there an opportunity to change that? So all of these things can be done regardless of scale. The challenge, though, as we all recognise for SMEs, is how do you find the time and the resource to do that when SMEs are really busy just building the business in the first place? That can be a challenge. However, there are my advice there would be to seek advice from experts. There are some good LED companies that will happily come in and talk to you about your lighting. You don't need to become an expert in LED. They'll do that and they'll give you a proposal for how much it will cost to do, which should have a pretty fast payback. So there is help available if you need that. So, Stephen, does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Greg. Another question we've got here is, why were raw materials or ingredients out of scope? So, for example, simplifying ingredients and reducing chemical inputs. Have you got some sort of thoughts around that?
So we did look actually at supplier collaboration and how you can reduce your footprint upstream, by working with suppliers. We've just not covered that in this discussion. It becomes a complex issue, but on the other hand, love to hear your thoughts about supplier collaboration in order to drive resource efficiency in doing that. So it wasn't out of scope in the Next Manufacturing Revolution report. It's just for this workshop on the 23rd, we're trying to keep it simple by working on issues within the factory fence or the factory walls for food and beverage manufacturers, and those are the 4 topics that we've picked up.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Just a couple more questions then. So one of the barriers you mentioned was legal issues, and you made reference to the co-op there. Are there any other examples in the report of legal issues which arose and companies, or how companies tackled those?
Yeah, so let me give you another example. So transport efficiency can be improved by collaborating with others, because let's face it, in this world of white label products, in many instances, and home brands, in many instances, and third party manufacturer, often the same products under various brands are going from the same factory to the same store. And where that happens, it's important to collaborate to try and increase truckloads. I mean, there are some statistics that are quite scary. Something like 27% of all trucks on the road have absolutely nothing in them. And that surprised me. So we doubled and triple checked it in the next manufacturing research, and we found it's the same in America, in the UK, and in Europe. Those sort of statistics are crazy, including, and those trucks that do have a load in them are actually on average 57% full due to weight and a whole bunch of other issues, including not lack of ability or lack of practice of combining loads. So that sort of collaboration, the key legal issue there is, well, what if we want to combine it with a competitor's load, and take that to your legal team, and typically they'll say you can't do that because it's anti-competitive. Now that's wrong. Actually, we know that the Department of Business Innovation and Skills is keen to try and get that sort of collaboration going because it's good for everyone. It takes trucks off the road, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and there are some interesting examples in Europe. For instance, there's an initiative called the CO3 initiative, which is starting to do that sort of competitive collaboration in order to reduce transport emissions. So that's another big example of a barrier in the legal side of things that many companies struggle with. We've worked with companies that combine, for instance, in cash transport in Australia. I worked on 6 or 7 projects there in my booze and company days that actually sort of helped them develop a utility that helps all of the banks and many retailers with cash transport, and does so in a very efficient way because it's representing all of those. It has some enforceable undertakings in order to do that, so it becomes a pretty complex legal field pretty quickly. But on the other hand, it is achievable, and we think in the next sort of 10 to 15 years, that's going to become a lot more prevalent, especially with things like collaboration around transport and waste infrastructure and those sorts of things.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And just one final question. Someone's asking, will you be sharing the results from the workshop later in the month?
Yeah, yes, indeed we will. And that's our promise to the 2 Degrees community. Thank you for your input and ongoing input in the discussion that will go for the next week or so. We're very keen to share with everyone the findings of that work, that roundtable. We think that's very important because it enables you to take those ideas back and review what's been said and comment further. So yes, we will be writing that up and making that publicly available through the 2 Degrees community.
Great. Thank you very much. So that's all we've got time for now, but I'd like to thank Greg for his time today and for getting through so many questions, and also for everyone who joined us for this webinar. A recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform. And again, I'd just like to remind you that we have the forum discussion in the supply chain working group on 2 Degrees, where you can add your views and thoughts. So I hope you found today interesting and useful, and you'll be able to join us again in the future for further webinars. So thank you, everyone.